All right, so we're going to start actually with the lower leg. So I broke it down to just 4 areas. Lower leg, movement impairments of postural distortions, knees, which of course we all know the most common one is knees caving in, or this pronation distortion syndrome, which is both lower leg and the knees. And then lumbo-pelvic hip complex, which I'm really just going to combine the lower cross syndrome with low back arches and or excessive forward lean. We'll kind of talk about that a little bit and how those are slightly different. And then upper cross syndrome, of course, that we all have, we're all dealing with. So let's start at the lower leg. If you have a foam roller, you can use it. I'll go over this really quickly because we've done some foam rolling before. So, of course, we know that with most of our pronation distortion, so feet pronating or collapsing or turning out, it can have to do with tightness in our calves. The other, not postural distortion, but the other movement compensation in the overhead squat is actually if the heels lift up or if we have that excessive forward lean here, it's often because we're lacking dorsiflexion, okay? Now, you can measure dorsiflexion with the goniometer. If you're in KIN 155, you got the goniometer. That was actually one of the things you were going to measure for this week's lab. I'm looking around for it. I know I had it up there somewhere. But this is how you can kind of double check. Is it really dorsiflexion limitation that is keeping me from this squat or causing this movement compensation? So you could measure if we're actually able to get into that position. And if not, if you can barely get into that, well then, we need to start with inhibiting and stretching those calves, okay? So let's start with that. We're gonna start with inhibiting and lengthening muscles first. So we can start by foam rolling. Now, remember the protocol for foam rolling. We don't foam roll over joints. We only foam roll over muscles. And you can go real slow. I think the speed they used to say was about like 1 inch per second, something like that. But what I was taught was roll slowly over it one direction, okay? And then as you're rolling back, look for that tender spot, that trigger point that you're like, ooh, ouch, there it is, and hold it there. You're gonna hold it on the tender spot for about 30 seconds. Now, in the corrective exercise specialist, they say up to 90 seconds. That's a long time to hold it. And it's kind of hard for your clients sometimes to wrap their heads around spending that much time on the foam roller. So minimum 30 seconds basically is the recommendation. Now, a lot of people will complain here of their wrists, right? So here's some options. You can go on your fists, right? You can set the butt down, and instead of lifting the hips here, put more pressure on by crossing the leg over, okay? Then you can also do your pin and stretch technique where you're on that trigger point. I just found one kind of on that lateral gastrocnemius, which would make sense, right? If the feet turn out. You can find that trigger point and then do some pin and stretch. So do some dorsiflexion, plantar flexion in the foot. We always do the dynamic stretch at the distal joint. Okay. So that can sometimes help to inhibit it more. Maybe do some circles. This can get real painful. All right. Even up those sides here. Foam roll on your other calf. So the 3 that we're going to focus on, calves for this one, calves, and then our TFL or IT band, right? Because remember, if the feet are turning out or pronating, collapsing inward, a lot of times the knees also come inward. And this could be due to our biceps femoris, the short head being overactive, and or TFL and IT band being overactive. So I'm just going to hit a couple birds with one stone here. And then, of course, we always want to follow up the foam rolling with a static stretch because there's ample evidence that they work best together, better together than either one independently. They can work slightly independently, but so much better together. All right, so immediately after foam rolling your calves, you can go into a calf stretch. So you probably know this one, right? Pushing against the wall. Just make sure, here's the cheat, right? Is that the foot turns out. So if your client, I'm going to demonstrate right here. If you see your client doing this and their foot starts to turn out, the heel starts to come in, right? Have them reset, point those toes forward, press the heel towards the ground, step in if they have to, right? And really get that stretch, because that'll help to stretch that lateral gastrocnemius, okay? The cheat here is if that lateral gastrocnemius and your biceps femoris is overactive. So we're really not getting that length that we want, okay? So generally recommended to stretch for 30 seconds. Once you feel the tension kind of subside, you can push a little bit deeper. I'm going to show you another one. You can switch sides. Oops, I have somebody else coming in. Oh, April, sorry. All right, so I'm going to show you a different one. This one's a little bit more for your soleus. So for your soleus, what you can do is that same stretch and then just bend the back knee. Because if we do it with our knee bent, we're getting more soleus, less gastrocnemius. Gastrocnemius crosses the back of the knee, right? So in order to stretch that one more effectively, we have to have the knee straight. But if we bend the knee, we get to get more into the soleus. So another one I like to do is this kneeling stretch, right? So you get into this little crouch right here, heel down on the floor, foot pointing forward, and then you lean on top of your knee. And you'll start feeling that deeper into your soleus. Did some jumping jacks on Wednesday. That was a mistake. No, just kidding. No, but I'm definitely feeling that in my calves for sure. It was for a fundraiser. So I think we did 140 in 2 minutes. It's not terrible. All right, so once you're done stretching the calves, let's move up the body. Now, one of the other places you can foam roll is your biceps femoris. Typically, you won't feel a whole lot, right? So a lot of times people actually don't have a lot of tightness in the hamstrings. It might feel good, but you may not have a lot of trigger points. So it may be more effective to focus on the TFL. So I'm going to show you that one. But if you are going to foam roll your hamstrings, you do it like this. And again, you're trying to get more of that lateral hamstring. So instead of going straight down the middle, you can kind of externally rotate your hip and get the back of that thigh, but in your hamstrings. The other hard part too is that we don't really have a lot of weight or pressure on this. So unless your hamstrings are really tender because you did a lot of deadlifts the other day, it's hard to get enough pressure on your hamstrings to really get in there into that big muscle. So may not be as effective, but you can try it. Give it a go. I actually feel this, if I externally rotate, I feel it a little bit more in my IT band. And you might find that you feel it more either up towards the top of your hamstring, like up towards your sit bone, your ischium, or down towards your knee. Just don't roll over the back of the knee. There's like a nerve bed back there. All right, so let's do TFL then. So remember what we've said about the TFL, right? It's up here, right at the top of the hip. It feeds into your IT band. And a lot of people would actually roll the IT band. I started with that notion. NASM, we did that for a long time. And then the argument is, though, because it's a tendon and not actually muscle tissue, it's also really painful. Like, how much of that do we have to suffer through if it's a tendon, if it's not actually causing those neuromuscular changes? So general recommendation is, if you can tolerate it, yes, you can go ahead and roll it. You might get some benefit from it, but you can also just shift to your vastus lateralis, which is your quadriceps muscle on the outside of your thigh here. So we will start up here in the TFL, and then you can have the option to roll down all the way down your IT band. So start up at the top of the ilium right here, your hip bone, and then keep that leg, that bottom leg straight. We're going to cross that top leg over the front so we can really get onto the side. because that's where your TFL is, right between your ilium here and then your greater trochanter. And I like to go down on my elbow with this so that I'm not arching my spine, laterally flexing my spine so much. So usually you'll start feeling that without rolling too far. You'll get a little trigger point, tender spot right there, kind of in the meat, right in the meat of that TFL. So see if you can find that. Hold that for about 30 seconds. You can also use that other foot, push it into the ground to take some of the pressure off, and that's somewhat helpful. And then of course, NASM always reminds us whenever we're doing any foam rolling, recheck your form, especially upper body form, because a lot of times we'll be so focused on where we're foam rolling, we forget and we start hunching or collapsing into the shoulder. So be mindful of that as well. Posture up top. All right, now I'm going to actually tip onto my vastus lateralis. So I'm almost rolling my quad here. Well, I am. I'm rolling one of them. All right, and then as you go down, ooh, mama, yes. That's where we have a lot of trigger points. So again, you can roll slowly down and then come back up. And notice I'm using my other hand to help support me, take some of the weight off. Use your foot. Find that tender spot. Ooh, trigger point. Hold it. Breathe. Breathe. Now, the cool part about doing all this inhibition and all of this lengthening, inhibit and lengthen first, is that you should actually be able to see some positive changes in that overhead squat almost immediately, because we are actually having this neuromuscular effect of inhibiting and changing the length of that muscle. So what that does is it allows for that range of motion to occur. Sorry, it's trash day. Ew. All right, if you haven't already, go ahead and switch sides. Get your nice setup. Bottom leg straight, top leg bent. Almost like you're doing a side plank here. Find that TFL, tender spot. Breathe. Another thing to do as a personal trainer is you can be talking to your client, right? As they're doing this, telling them about what you're planning on doing, asking them how their day is going, you know, get them to talk to you. And then you can ask them, all right, how's it feeling now? Within about 30 seconds, it should start going away, okay? Okay, so you can tip a little bit forward, walk it down. Oh yeah, this will get it too. This side has it too. And the pin and stretch here is actually quite painful. I don't even know if I want to show you. But if you get to that point that you can tolerate it, just bend that bottom leg. Bend that knee. I'll see if I can show you at a spot up here. Ooh, yep. So you would do a little floor sweep here, or I don't even think I can do it. Coach Aaron obviously needs to do more foam rolling. But you would bend, flex and extend that knee. That could be your pin and stretch here. Now, if you don't have a foam roller, or your client doesn't have a foam roller, you could also use something like a tennis ball, softball. That'll be kind of painful. Yeah, any type of sports ball. You know, even like a soccer ball would be kind of a nice cushy start, right? But yeah, start with like a deflated or kind of a underinflated tennis ball. Works really well. Just remember, it's a smaller surface area, so it's going to be more pinpointed pressure. So let's do our TFL stretch. So you can actually do this as a hip flexor stretch too. We might actually kill a couple birds with one stone. Now, for your hip flexors, we can't get your psoas. So when we roll it, we're going to be rolling really your rectus femoris, which is one of your hip flexors. So you can roll that first if you want to, but I'm going to demonstrate. Remember Coach Aaron's favorite stretch here, okay? So the key is to tuck the hips under, all right? Really posteriorly tilt that pelvis. Stay up tall here. Same arm comes up. And then here's where we get more of that TFL, is we kind of press that hip out and lean to the opposite side. Okay, don't let yourself collapse in this way. I made that mistake before. You can open it up a little bit. This will get a little more psoas, but the goal here is to kind of press the hip out away and still keep that posterior pelvic tilt. I'll show you a standing version when we get to the other side. And come out of this very gently. All right, so the standing version, how can I demonstrate this? All right, imaginary wall. So you would do this against a wall like this, okay? Hold on to the wall. All right, so if this is the wall, if you were the wall, I'm gonna cross the outside foot in front, and then I'm going to press this hip towards the wall this way. All right, so I'm pinning my foot together, okay? And then I'm trying to keep everything here straight. Don't hinge at the hips, because that's not gonna work. You can even try and squeeze the glutes. Try to get into that posterior pelvic tilt. It won't work that great, but try. And then press this hip in towards the wall. So it's not leaning away like this, getting your oblique stretch. It's pressing the hip in. So look at what we're doing here is you are basically doing a reverse hip adduction, right? So this leg that I'm stretching, I'm trying to bring it in by pressing the top of my hip out. And that's stretching your TFL, which does hip abduction, right? Does the opposite. And this one you may feel a little bit more up there in the TFL because we're not really including the hip flexors in this stretch. So a couple of options there for you. All right, now, how are we going to activate our underactive muscles here? So let's start with the foot and actually the ankle. So you can get a band if you have one. You can also do this without a band. I would start with a light band. This is kind of a medium grade band. So actually the first one that you can do, I'm gonna take my shoe off for this. I would do it barefoot too. I'd recommend doing it barefoot, is toe curls, all right? So you can get a towel, put a towel on the floor and curl your toes like so. So gathering the towel up underneath your toes. This can help with that arch, creating that arch. Another one that I've never been able to do well is called the short foot. And that's where you're not curling your toes. You're just trying to pretend that there's a little thumbtack underneath your arch and pull it up. But I've never been able to really do this well. It probably means I need to practice it more. But for our tibialis anterior and posterior, we can do some band exercises. I realize I don't have the right camera angle for this. Lots of foreshortening happening here. Okay, so if you wrap this band around your foot and you hold it this way, you can go forward, but we want to do the opposite. So you can have a partner or put it on something and go up. So I'm just going to demonstrate because I should get my daughter to just hold it for me. So you're going to pull away. So the band is supposed to be resisting and you're pulling your toes up and away. Okay, you could kind of rig this up if you have a bench or something you can attach it to. All right. I have to hold it up here now, but pulling up. So we're trying to pull up, toes towards the knee. And sometimes doing it without the band can be just as good, right? So sitting here, pull the toes up, hold and squeeze, and then relax. So see how you can start feeling that in that tibialis anterior and that front shin muscle. Now, you can also do this for inversion and eversion. It's actually great to do both. This is actually one of those exercises I learned from athletic training that they would do to help people who'd had ankle sprains. All right, so if you hold it away on the inside, then we're going to do some eversion. So pulling your foot. Now, make sure that you're not just pointing and flexing, right? We're actually turning the foot away. And you're not just bringing your toes up. You are actually turning the foot away. And you'll feel it on the outside of that leg. Maybe if I go like this, you'll be able to see better. Yeah, there we go. You'll feel it here in your fibularis muscle group. Okay, and then the opposite is going inward. So again, you may have to have somebody hold it here, but this one you're going to feel a little bit more on the inside, that medial aspect, and in the arch. And you can use your standard like 3 sets of 10 rest for this. This is a good activation exercise. You can use it as part of the movement prep. How does that feel? Interesting to feel all those muscles in your lower leg and in your arch get active. Another thing I really like to do, I actually don't like to wear shoes a lot. Well, I will now that it's starting to get cooler. But check out your shoes. Like these shoes I have are very flat, right? They have a very flat, stiff sole. And I got them a size bigger actually so I could spread my toes out a little bit more. They're not great for that. But as you're walking around, try and spread your toes out. I know some people actually wear those toe spreaders to help prevent things like bunions from happening. Okay, we did toe curls, we did the ankle band. All right, now hamstrings. So typically it's your lateral hamstrings that are overactive and medial hamstrings that are underactive. So you can do just a regular hamstring curl if you had the machine, or you could do a hamstring curl on the floor, but the resistance is kind of challenging. So I like to do the hamstring curls on the ball, but we need to be careful and watch out for certain cues. So what people like to do, what the body likes to do when the lateral hamstring is overactive is we turn the feet out from here, right? So we end up doing this. And it's hard for us to control the balance here too. So coach your client to go feet straight up, okay? Make sure that their feet are aligned with the hips. They're not out here. They're not wider. So we have feet hip width apart. It's gonna feel narrow at first, and toes pointing up and almost in, okay? Then lift. You might even start feeling this just from lifting up into I guess this is a bridge, right? A straight leg bridge on the ball, all right? From here, have them pull it in and keeping those toes pointed up and almost a little bit inward. Nice and slow. Now, if this is a bit much, right, you can have them set it down, pull it in, lift up, push it out. Okay, so what are we doing here? We're actually giving them a little bit of a break on the concentric portion, the shortening portion, and we're focusing on the eccentric portion, right? So getting them to control that lengthening, okay? So that's a little regression that you can do, okay? And even in the phase 1 of the OPT model, they really emphasize that eccentric portion. So you can do that with counts too. 4 counts out, right? Like a 1 or 2 count hold, maybe at the top or at the bottom, only 1 count in, 4, 3, 2, 1 going out. All right, how are we feeling? Do you feel that on the medial hamstring? A little bit more. Yes, give me a thumbs up if you feel it. Okay, what if you don't have a ball? I'll show you another one. This one kind of hurts. I'm not gonna lie. There's a, I guess regressing it is just taking smaller steps. But you get into that glute bridge, right? And then we're just walking our heels out in front of us. So right about there, this starts to really burn if you're still lifting your hips off the ground. And once again, the cue is toes up, almost coaching them so almost they're pointing in, right? Almost pointing in so we can really activate that medial hamstring. And it's going to feel like their toes are pointing in, like they're pigeon-toed, because they're so used to having them turn out. Yeah, that one is kind of brutal. All right, now how do we integrate this? So there are a lot of different integration exercises. With an integration exercise, you want it to be as functional as possible. So start thinking about activities of daily life, functional activities. If this person is walking or running throughout their day, they're spending a lot of time on a single leg. So we can start with just something like a single leg balance, right? And having them watch that foot and try to get that foot to be neutral and straight. Then you can add a reach. So we can kind of reach to the front, reach to the side, and reach to the back. And you can actually externally rotate from this stable hip back like so, and do reps this way. Okay, controlling that. So level 1 for balance is always stable stance leg. Everything else can move around on top of that, right? So stable stance leg, everything else can move around. If we want to graduate that up to a little bit more of a challenge, we can start adding things like a single leg squat. I would just go down to about a quarter and then come up. Adding a balance to a step up or to a lunge. So asking them to lunge either forward or back, right? Keeping the knee tracking, trying to keep the foot straight, and then up to single leg balance. Now, the key with this is the step up or the single leg balance. We're going to drive the foot into the ground, squeeze the glutes, keep the rib cage stacked over the hips, okay? Because the cheat here, you know, when people have the knee collapse, they'll push up and they'll be like right here, right? They'll be like, I'm done. And then they'll go right into the next one, right? But we really want that stability to be ingrained. So we're going to have them push through the whole foot into the floor, drive it into the floor, squeeze the glutes. They should be feeling it in the hamstrings, right? They should be feeling it a little bit in the core. So we're really trying to just teach the body to move that way. Okay, so remember, every exercise can be an assessment, and every exercise can train the body in the right neuromuscular pattern. Okay, questions for lower leg? Any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So the toe curl, is that pretty much the same thing as like, because I learned this like years ago. It wasn't the loop band. It was more of a, not the loop one, but the long string of resistance band.
Yeah.
And I think they called it like sickle foot.
Yeah, I've heard it like short foot. So the short foot is actually, let me get
like
closer.
This is turned inwards, and then you pull this.
Yeah, there's many different ways to do it because of all of the different actions that your ankle can do, right? The important part is
was like that, right? Or something like that. Like,
yeah,
you should feel here.
Yeah, that's more, you're doing an
besides my back. Okay.
Yeah, so you can do, so if I'm pretending that my wrist is my ankle, you can do this kind of inversion, eversion with the band, you know, dorsiflexion, plantar flexion, that's fine. For the arch though, pretend that this is the arch, you can do like a short foot, which is like this. It's just supposed to be like that, okay? Just arch coming up. Now with the toe curls, you're using the toes too. So you're kind of doing, I don't know if this is giving you the right visual, but you're doing this. So you're curling the toes, and yes, it's still activating this tissue on the bottom of the foot with the arch, but the short foot actually activates it independently with the toes extended. And I think that's why it's such a hard thing to do, but it really helps to get you that activation of the arch when your toes are flat, like if you're walking, right? So curling the toes can be helpful to activate those muscles, but you don't walk with curled toes. You walk with your toes extended, and you have to have that extension, especially in the first, your big toe extension, right? That. So it's helpful to do that short foot, or at least practice it. It's like half of it is the intention, just trying to get that neuromuscular link. So yeah, good question. There's a whole bunch. You could do all 4 directions: dorsiflexion, plantar flexion, inversion, eversion, short foot, curling with the toes, picking up marbles with the toes, walking around barefoot, spreading your toes. All that is really good to get back in touch with your feet. Okay, so if the knees cave in, we already did a lot of this already. So you can foam roll and stretch the calves still too. The one that we haven't done is adductors. So if you want to grab that foam roll again, I'll show you the adductor one. This one is awkward for some clients. Just walk them through it and tell them why it's important. And remember that just because we're inhibiting the adductors does not mean that we don't need to strengthen them. I've noticed that with adductors and with hip flexors. A lot of times we, even with NASM personal trainers, they think, oh, we don't need to be strengthening that muscle because we don't want it to be overactive again. And you have to remember that the reason why it's overactive could be because it's weak and the underactive muscles aren't doing their job. So just keep that in mind. We can still strengthen it. Okay, so get into like your plank position. Hips, try to make them flat towards the ground. On the elbows, you can grip the floor here. Remember your upper body posture. Foam roller goes right underneath this knee that is abducted out to the side, externally rotated. Okay, and we can start kind of almost on that VMO, but on the inside, and we roll it up towards the hip. Now, sometimes what helps is actually to turn this foam roller so it's kind of like a V. Okay, so it's kind of like a V in an angle, and then you can roll it kind of sideways all the way up towards the pubic bone. Okay, we don't actually roll it over the hips though. Stop when you get there. Typically, the tender spots are right up towards the top. So if you find one, hold it there and breathe. Or we get a tender spot down here towards the knee, right? So a lot of times our tender spots are right near the origin and insertion of those muscle groups. So if you find one, hold it there for about 30 seconds, deep breathing. You can do a pin and stretch here, which again, we're moving the distal joint. So we're going to do some flexion and extension of that knee. Be really gentle and careful with this one. Whoo! Oh yeah, that'll get it. But the biggest cheat that I see a lot of people do with this is they turn their hips open on the side, like so, right? So we want to really coach them to take those, the ASIS, the hip bones in the front, and press them towards the floor. So we're keeping those hips flat. All right, you can give that a try on the other side. Make yourself even. Again, watching upper body form. Kind of have to do this little inchworm crawl across. Oh, yep, that's where I'm feeling it. The adductors do a lot that we don't give them credit for because their name is adductor. So a lot of times we just think of them as doing hip adduction, right? But remember, they're also synergists for hip flexion, and the adductor magnus, the posterior fibers of the adductor magnus, are also synergists for hip extension. And if you're at the bottom of your squat, in fact, I've read some studies that show that at the bottom of the squat here, they actually really help you to get out of the hole, right? Out of that sticking point, and then your glutes take over. So if you see people that have a functional valgus, so when they go down, they're like so, and then as they're activating to come up to the top, they come in just a little bit and then come up. That's because they're really using those adductors to fire it up. Some coaches, not NASM, but some coaches are okay with that, a little bit of functional valgus, especially if it's like a max lift. You know, they're trying to increase their back squat. So going down like here is okay. If they're competing, they're okay with doing this a little bit, but only on the way up, right? And if they're squatting body weight, they can do it perfectly with great form. So that's a little bit of a difference of opinion. Okay, so if we're going to stretch adductors, oh, you know what? I didn't show you the biceps femoris stretch. Let's do that one too, because that one's one of the potentially overactive muscles here also. So then we'll get into our adductor stretch, and there's plenty of stretches for adductors. Okay, so let's say we're going to do our supine hamstring stretch here. I'm going to show you at 45 degrees. Okay, so you probably go straight up, right? Now you can use a towel, you can use a band, whatever you have. If you want to really get the biceps femoris, bring this leg across the body and keep the hip down. Okay, so we're going across the body here and keeping the hip pressed down towards the ground. So you'll start to feel it on the outside, the lateral hamstring here. Now you don't need to flex your toes up towards your face, okay? If you do that and you're pulling really hard, you will start stretching your nerves instead of your muscles, okay? So your sciatic nerve runs all the way down and into your foot. Nerves don't like to be stretched. They'll get that kind of tingly nerve sensation, and then they may fire back up and give you some more pain later on during the day. So we'll just stretch our calves separately. We don't have to stretch them with the hamstrings. It's actually sometimes better to try to isolate muscles when you're stretching them. So same thing on this leg. I'm going to go all the way up into that hip flexion and knee extension, trying to get that hamstring. And then to target the biceps femoris, I'm going to bring the leg across the body, but the cheat is that we lift the hip, right? So I'm going to try to drive that hip down towards the ground and just bring that leg across the body. And then if you're doing PNF stretching, you have them press at a 45-degree angle, right, away. You can actually do that a little bit with your strap here. Press away and you'll feel that lateral hamstring light up, and then release and pull it a little bit more, keeping that hip flat on the ground. So it's a little bit of an angle to really get that biceps femoris. Yeah. Okay, what about adductors? You could do with the stretching strap, you could go out to the side, but I find a lot of people struggle to control this. You really have to do it with a strap. So you can do this one out to the side, and that's a good adductor stretch, but a lot of people, this is really painful for them and hard to control. Okay, so another one that I really like is a standing adductor stretch. Okay, so remember that our our adductors are also hip flexors. They're synergists, so we're going to stretch using that knowledge too. So I usually step forward, so I'm about heel to toe here in a wide stance. Okay, and then I'm going to tuck my hips under, do that posterior pelvic tilt. You might even start feeling it just with that. Then we lunge into that front foot, the foot that's forward, until we feel a stretch here in our adductors. And if your adductors are pretty loose, pretty flexible, you might not feel this so much. That's okay, I have another one. So this is typically a little bit better or more targeting, especially those anterior fibers of your adductor group, rather than just doing it with your feet even like this, because most of the times we'll sit back, right? This is okay, it's not bad. This just gives it a little bit of a different angle to stretch at. You can try that on both sides, see if you feel a difference. The other one that I like to do though, and this is great as a part of a warm-up because it can be done as a dynamic stretch, is on the floor, on all fours, and you put one leg out to the side. We've done this before for workout time, right? So let me go at a 3/4 turn here, or a quarter turn, I guess, not 3/4. So you're on all fours, you put one leg out to the side, and even from here, you can kind of adjust the other knee to get a little bit of a stretch here in your adductors. But all we're gonna do is sit back onto our heel, and you'll feel that in a different place. So the dynamic stretching part is that you actually just rock back and forth, nice and slow. We don't push. We only go to the point of tension, right? And this is, I like this stretch a lot. This is really great right before you do legs or you do some squatting or side lunges, because we're telling the adductors, this position's okay, right? This range of motion is okay. You don't need to tense up. You don't need to tighten up. You can try that on the other leg, see if you feel a difference. So then when you do go squat or side lunge or do your Cossack squat or whatever, the adductors should be more friendly, allow you to get into that abduction position. And that's, again, that's why we do the inhibition and lengthening before we do our activation. If we don't inhibit and lengthen those overactive muscles, they won't allow our underactive ones to actually do their job, right? We have reciprocal inhibition, but we also have that inability to get into that range of motion because they're overactive and tensing up. So let's do some activation. So remember Jane Fonda. All right, these are great exercises. They really are. So what we're trying to do is get our gluteus medius to be more active. If the knees cave in, I'm going to stand up for a second. You guys can stay laying down. But if the knees cave in here, all right, one of the main muscles that actually helps to control external rotation of the hip here is our gluteus medius. And that's often underactive, okay? So our adductors are bringing it in, but our gluteus medius is not active enough to externally rotate it and keep it tracking. So we want to turn that on, all right? So a great way to do that is with our clamshell exercise. So laying down on your side, heels are glued together. We're making this, knees are bent, so we're making this kind of V shape. We want to keep the body on the side here. So abs are tight. Put the other hand in front of you so we're not tipping back, okay? That's the big cheat, is people will tip open like this. So hips stay stacked vertically. Sometimes I'll even coach clients to put a couple fingers on the side of their hip here. And then as we do this clamshell, they should feel that muscle really light up. Okay, so heels stay together, feet stay together. You're just opening up that hip. And here's where you can also start seeing differences in strength on each side of the body. So sometimes you'll see this right away, right? Like you may have been taking people through foam rolling, stretching their adductors, and like they're like, nope, don't feel anything. This is no problem, right? I feel barely any stretch. And then you get them to this exercise and they can only go up to here, right? And you're like, go, 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 go. And it's because their gluteus medius is underactive and weak. All right. So that's a really great one. Another great one from this position is just straightening that leg out, turning the toe down, and now we're going to go back up to a 45-degree angle. So we're getting some of that abduction and some hip extension. So our gluteus maximus is also an underactive muscle here, so we want to give that some activation too. So we're going to take our heel and basically kick the wall behind us. Okay, so we start with the toes pointed at the ground, and then we go up and kick the wall behind us. So try not to do this, right? Too much movement. With these activation exercises, we are trying to isolate, right? We isolate and activate first, then we integrate it into the movement. Do you feel it burning? Yes? Can give that one a nice stretch. Try it on the other side so you can even yourself out here. Do some clamshells. Now you can do this on the ball too. Let me show you on the ball. You can do it on the ball or on the floor. So the way I like to do it on the ball is like so. Over the side, you can touch the floor. Again, keeping that core tight. I like to just do straight abduction, abduction here. So I'll just lift like so. And you will feel this in the stable leg too. Okay. Not only up here, but also in the stable leg. Then what I'll do instead of the clamshell, I will do an external rotation. So I'll hold it up and simply externally rotate from the hip, not from the ankle or the knee. And this is a very small movement, but boy, does it burn. You will feel it. So resist the tendency to want to open up here. Keep the core in nice and tight and just move from the hip. And that'll burn, baby, burn. This one's great for runners, right? Think about it. If you're running, if you watch people run, one of the things I see the most when I watch people run is their feet turn out, they're running along, right? And their knees are going forward. Or I see their knees coming together like this as they're running, right? So this can be really helpful. That's telling me that while I'm doing this sagittal plane movement, I don't have the frontal plane stability to keep myself from doing that knee collapse, having the knees collapse. So now that we've activated, you know, you could do some other things to activate too. I think NASM, if you have the tube, they really like this one, this tube walking. Okay, here's the difference, by the way. At the ankles, because our lever is longer, we have more resistance. But this is more advanced. It's for people who can keep the kneecaps aligned with your toes. If you really want to give them a nice external cue to externally rotate that hip, put it right above the knees, okay? So now the resistance is actually here rather than just at the foot, because I could do this all day long, right? If it's at the ankle. But if I have it at the knees, now I'm actually getting that tactile feedback from the band that's saying, press this out here, okay? And then our lateral tube walking is just the monster walk, right? That we've done before. And you can have them do it forward. So we're doing a sagittal plane movement, but with frontal plane resistance. So we're really starting to integrate that now. Integrate and activate at the same time. Okay, glute bridges obviously are great. I'll show you one version. I don't know if I showed you this before. I can't remember. But this is a great version that I really like, again, for runners, because we need to get that equal and opposite. So we need some hip flexion and hip extension of the opposite hip. So I'll go here like so, and then I'll march. So I want to pull this one up as high as I can and push the other one down as hard as I can and still keep those toes vertical, and then switch, and then switch. This one is killer. Okay, and you can do this with a band too. If you do it with a bent knee, you can also do this on the bench, and you can do one at a time, driving the other hip up, right, into hip flexion. Now what this does, oh, my bench is slipping. What this does too is it gives the adductors a break, because remember, adductors are synergists for hip flexion. So if we can train the hip flexors and the hip extensors to do their job a little bit better when we're walking and running, that takes some of the stress off of our adductors to do that. So that's why I like to train both at the same time, equal and opposite. So I kind of get that hip drive back and hip flexion coming up. Even more so if you wrap the band around your toes and do that. Okay, of course, another great way to do this integration is with the single leg squat. I'll show you a step up too. Now here's the thing with the step up. Actually, I'm going to turn this forward. So you could do all of this inhibition, lengthening, activation, and then you get them to the integration exercise. And they're like, okay, I'm going to do a step up. And they go like this. And you're like, what? How did we do all of this? And your knees are still caving in. So here's a trainer trick. And I'm going to pretend to be the trainer. I would obviously have a much shorter step than this. This is too high. Okay. So as a trainer, get a resistance band, or even a resistance band is better because they have something they can pull against. I'm just going to demonstrate it with the stretching strap. Very light tension on this. You're as the trainer over here, standing and holding on to that resistance. And you are actually going to pull them into that valgus collapse. Okay. Very gently. Not a whole lot of tension. So as you're pulling them in here, you're going to coach them. I want you to resist that and push it out. Once again, this is that tactile feedback, okay? So they're going to drive it out. As they step up, drive it out, drive it out, drive it out, drive it out, right? So we're giving them the signal to push against the resistance here by pulling them into that collapse. You can do that with a stationary lunge too. So I'm the trainer. I'm going to hold it like this. I get them into that lunge stance, and then I give them some gentle tension to pull it in, right? So they have to drive it out and drive it out and drive it out as they are going down into that stationary lunge. And coach them again where to feel it. Where are you feeling this? You should feel this right here in that gluteus medius at the top of the hip, that you have to activate that to keep control of that knee. Another great muscle to focus on is your VMO. But your VMO is most active for about the last 30 degrees, okay? So that one is really great for this quarter squat, right? Could be a B stance, could be a single leg squat, quarter squat. You could even have them tap it and focus on that last 30 degrees of knee extension, really tightening up using those that vastus medialis quadricep muscle to control that. Another tactile cue, which you obviously can't give on Zoom, but you could coach them to maybe do this, is to have them meet your hand, right? So the problem with tactile cueing, which we're not actually running across now because we can't touch each other, but the problem is that trainers get touchy-feely, right? Sometimes too touchy-feely. And so sometimes people really don't like that. They don't appreciate that. I don't blame them. You know, you always ask before you touch somebody. But a great way to help make someone more comfortable is to have them meet your hand rather than you touching them, right? So instead of saying, I want you to focus here, right? You instead say, can you bring your knee to meet my hand instead? And then you're giving them some sort of external target to focus on, okay? You could coach them to do this with a wall. Right next to the wall, press your leg against the wall, right? As you go down. Now it's going to be hard on their upper body, right? But you could coach them a little bit that way too, to kind of externally rotate from the hip. Okay. Any questions? Now you don't have to do all of this. Just pick a couple of things that you like, integrate it into the program, right? Okay, low back. Are we ready for low back? Yes? Any questions? No questions on that? Okay, so let's start with low back. So typically we see and you know what, I was seeing this on my push-ups the other day in Kin 167. I was like, oh, once I had that other camera set up, I could see the side, and I was like, it's because I've been sitting all morning. So that low back arch in our overhead squat and or that lower cross syndrome, right? We typically think of overactive hip flexors, overactive erector spinae, underactive glutes, right? If it's in the overhead squat, it could also be our lats. All right, so we've rolled a lot of these already. Calves, more for forward lean. You're not going to roll your abs, although your abdominals can be overactive for forward lean. Hip flexors, if we're going to roll the hip flexors, remember, no matter what massage therapists will tell you, it's almost impossible to actually get in deep enough to actually get the psoas. So we're going to roll one of the hip flexors, your rectus femoris. This is really your quads. So we start again right on top, right up at the ASIS, not quite on top of it, just below. The other leg is out to the side for support and balance. And then again, people will cheat like this, right? They'll have the hip lifted up. We're going to coach them to press it down. This is where going one side at a time can be so, so helpful. We're in a plank position here, walking the elbows forward, rolling it down the quads, almost till we get to the kneecap. We don't roll over the kneecap, and then we can roll it back. Nice and slow till you get a trigger point or a tender spot, and then hold it 30 seconds or so. All right, keep going if you need to. I'm going to move my bench over because I want to show you a great hip flexor stretch. This was so much easier to do when we had training tables. All right, so if you are getting close to being finished foam rolling your rectus femoris, you can do the other side too when we come back. But let me show you a great hip flexor stretch. Obviously, you can do Coach Aaron's favorite stretch, the half kneeling one, posteriorly tilt the pelvis. But this is another great way to actually do an assisted stretch, and you can do it as a PNF stretch too. So get someone to sit on a training table, like a massage type table or an athletic training table, or even a high bench. Okay, I've even set up an aerobic step to a bunch of risers and done it that way. If you are coaching them to do it at home, you can have them do it on something about the height of their bed. But you want their butt to be right on the corner, right on the edge. Okay, that's really important. So now we're gonna lay back and bring one knee with us. Okay, pull this knee up towards the chest. Now you can see the further I get, it's starting to lift my other leg, right? So at this point, now I'm gonna posteriorly tilt my pelvis. So this gives me the opportunity to actually stretch that hip flexor. Okay, so if you're doing PNF stretching, I'll show you with the other side. Okay, so I'm posteriorly tilting the pelvis, your client is, by pulling the knee up to the chest. Then you can provide some resistance here. Now I can't do it without a partner, but if you're the trainer providing some resistance on the top of the knee, then they can push up, activating those hip flexors, right? And then relax and push down further. Okay, you can do a little bit more, bringing the knee back is one of the things is too, because hip flexors are, the rectus femoris is a hip flexor, you'll often get them kicking up or opening out to the side, right? As a cheat. So try to keep everything straight as possible. That one also feels good sometimes as a passive stretch, but it is really helpful to do it on the bench, because if you do it on the floor, let's say you're like right here, you're limited by the floor, right? You're not actually going to get a great hip flexor stretch unless your hip flexors are like super tight, and then that'll work anyways too. Okay, so if they have excessive forward lean, you can have them do an abdominal stretch, and this would just be over the top of the ball, right? This one just feels good. So you can have them stretch out the abs here over the top of the ball. This could happen if you do a bunch of abs, right? Get really sore. Or if your client is like just abtastic focused, just trying to get a six-pack that way, and they just have overactive abdominals, rectus abdominis. Yeah. Okay, we've done lat foam rolling before, but if you want to give it another go again, this can be overactive if during the overhead squat our low back is arching. I mean, it can also be overactive for upper cross syndrome, potentially for lower cross syndrome, although it's not as much. So we might as well hit them while we're here. So for the lats, remember, we're going to lay on our side. We want the foam roller to start right underneath the armpit. Okay, so maybe about like halfway down I usually say for ladies, this is like middle of your sports bra, okay? On the rib cage. The most important thing here is that we are on our side, and then we have the arm extended over the top and thumb up, okay? Because we want to get some external rotation of the shoulder here. If we're like this, we're not putting that lat on stretch. And so we can't get in there as deep and find those trigger points. So from here, yeah, you can roll down a little bit. Ooh, but the key to finding those trigger points is actually tip yourself forward and then tip yourself back at each incremental spot. Okay, tip forward, tip back, and you will find it. It could even be in your teres major, which is right up under your armpit. And scoot down, forward, back, right? If you find it, hold it. You can also do your pin and stretch here, which might be lifting. Could be floor sweep, internal, external rotation. Or big floor sweep from the shoulder. All right, I'm going to switch to the other side. Feel free to use this as homework. Do this in front of the TV. Now this one, remember, this is also going to help out with our upper cross syndrome, which we're going to do next. So a lot of these you can hit several postural distortions or movement compensations at once simply by picking the muscles that you're going to target. Most common, I would say, that will help with most postural distortions and movement compensations will be foam rolling calves, foam rolling your TFL and your IT bandor vastus lateralis, and then foam rolling your lats. So if I had to pick three, those would probably be my top three. Second to that, I would probably say adductors. Oh, adductors are good. Sometimes piriformis too, which I haven't showed you yet, but the piriformis is more for if the knees go out during the squat. Oh, left side. Left side is a little worse for me. And remember, it doesn't have to hurt to be effective. So don't get discouraged and think, oh, this foam rolling is not working just because it's not hurting. All right, if you have a ball or a bench, this is a great lat stretch. We're going to stretch right after we roll. So because our latissimus dorsi, it's going to insert up here underneath your humerus, and then it also has that origin down here in your thoracolumbar fascia. We're going to try to stretch at both ends. So we're going to get the shoulder into flexion on the ball as far as we can go. And I actually like to do this one arm at a time so I can support myself on the other side. So as far as you can go here, and then to get the thoracolumbar fascia here, we're going to posteriorly tilt the pelvis again. So we are going to round the back. So you can get into that shoulder flexion, even a little bit of that abduction across the body, across the head, and then tuck the pelvis under and kind of round the back. And this should give you a nice lat stretch here. Hold it for 30 seconds at least. You can kind of move the ball around a little bit. Once you get that end range of motion. Yeah. Looking good, everybody. Oh, wow, I didn't even realize the time. Sorry, I'm going overtime. All right, I'll run through the last few a little bit quicker, and you can just do them as homework. Okay, so that's our lengthening. Now, we need to activate the two probably most important muscle groups to activate for this lower cross syndrome or low back arch, our glutes and our intrinsic core stabilizer, so our transverse abdominis. So NASM will give you some exercises like marching for your TVA here. So you really have to teach your clients drawing in and or bracing. And NASM says drawing in first to really get in touch with that transverse abdominis. And then you just do this marching activity. So you just bring one leg up and set it down and opposite. And if you do this well, I promise you, it doesn't matter how much core strength you have or how ripped your abs are. If you do it correctly, draw in and then slow and controlled, bring that knee up. Even this tiny movement, you will feel it. You'll feel it in the right position, in the right area if you're doing it correctly. So it's not about getting maximum burn. For this move, it's about activating, learning how to get in touch with that transverse abdominis. Okay. So you can do that one. You can also graduate up to the bird dog, right? So the progression would be here. Now we're starting at 90 and we're tapping to the ground. And then the progression from there would be opposite arm, opposite leg. Like you're doing an upside down bird dog. And then the progression from there is going to be extending the leg all the way out, still keeping the pelvis in neutral. Okay, still either drawing in and or bracing. At this point, you probably want to brace all the way around. Okay, so that's a great one. While you're on your back here, of course, glute bridge. One of the best ones to do, focusing on that squeeze, right? $1 million squeeze here. If you feel it in your quads or in your hamstrings, adjust your stance. Because if you feel it in your hamstrings, a lot of times it's because the feet are too far out, right? So walk the knees in or walk the feet in. If you feel it in your quads, a lot of times it could be the position. So you can try stepping your feet out a little bit and see if that external rotation of the hips helps. Okay. Make sure though that your knee is always following your toes, going the same direction. So if we step out wider, we still want to have our knees pointing that same direction. Okay. And then you can try all the variations, single leg, crossing it, going straight up in the air, holds, pulses, all that good stuff. Okay. If we flip over, of course, the bridge is great, or I'm sorry, the prone bridge, the plank, is great for activating that core. The bird dog is often a better way to work people up to a great plank because there are so many ways to cheat and kind of compensate in a plank that it's helpful to do the bird dog first. So just remember the cues for the bird dog here. We're going to stiffen and brace the core all the way around, and then we're not moving from our rib cage to our pelvis. We're not moving that at all. We're extending from the hip and extending from the shoulder, and that's where we're moving from. Okay, so it's really about creating that stiffness. The plank, when we're doing the plank, some coaching cues. Stiff body, head to heels. Tuck the chin back, squeeze the glutes, and push the shoulders towards the floor. So you do want to get a little bit of protraction here in your plank. It's okay to have that curve in the thoracic spine when you're planking. That helps to keep this distance between our rib cage and our hips even. Okay, so that's another cue you can give is you can even have somebody put their pinkies and their thumbs on their ASIS and their rib cage and say, okay, keep this distance. Don't let it get bigger. Don't do a crunch and have it get smaller. maintain this distance here. So that's a great external cue you can give somebody. How do we really train this? Integrate it, of course, all the same things: step ups, squats, single leg balance reach. Ones that I really like to do also to kind of add to that would be the hip hinge. So teaching people how to do an RDL, hinge at the hips here. Then this means keeping this core brace that we got started and then extending the hips and making sure that that rib cage is stacked on top of the pelvis, right? So this hip hinge here, you can even have them do this. One hand in the low back, one hand on the belly. Keep that distance. Hip hinge, right? Bend and extend. So teach them how to do that. Dowling helps too. And then farmer's carries, farmer's walks. These are really great. So you can load one side or both sides, but get a heavy weight, usually heavier than something like this. And then you're going to coach them to get in that proper posture. So brace the core, rib cage down, squeezing the glutes, shoulders are even, right? And then you walk. And a farmer's walk is typically little short steps, pretty quick, and focusing on fighting that weight, right? Now I'm doing this like a suitcase carry, but you can do it with both. And that's actually a great stretch for your shoulders and really focusing on maintaining that core and getting that sagittal plane motion without arching the back. Okay, last one, upper cross syndrome, which I did put together some of these videos already. I posted them on my Instagram, but I need to post them on YouTube somewhere. We already did some of this. So the ones that we're missing, we did our lat foam rolling and stretching, so that you would include as well. Pecs, so you can grab a tennis ball, or I have a foam rolling ball right here. It's by Trigger Point. You can actually just have them press on top with the other hand, okay? So what we're looking for here is to try to get into this pec minor. So it's at the top. So if you look at the shoulder here, it's gonna be right below here, typically in this triangle. You could apply some pressure and then just roll over it with the ball, right? Sometimes even just digging around there with your finger, you'll find it. Now, if that's not enough, put the ball between you and the wall and that'll work, okay? Same thing with our levator scapula. So levator scapula is actually, the trigger point is typically right at the top, interior corner, medial corner of the scapula, just above that. This is where if your partner gives you a neck massage, it's like, yeah, keep it going right there. So that's where you put the ball between you and the wall. You can kind of roll around, find where that tender spot is. So I can't really do it because I have mats on the wall, but you get the idea, okay? Neck stretches can work for some people. They can feel good. But a lot of times when we're stretching our neck, like doing stuff like this is the levator scapula stretch, okay? So it's lateral flexion of your cervical spine to the side, and then turn your head down, and you can kind of help it with your hand, right? A lot of times this will feel good, and it can be useful to some people, but just be very careful with this because too much pressure, too much pulling, you're stretching nerves, and then they're gonna fire up again later, okay? It's almost better with the neck stuff to just foam roll and not even do the static stretching because we can risk stretching the nerves. Okay, I'm gonna show you another really great one on the foam roller though. And the point of this is actually not necessarily to inhibit, but it's to get more range of motion in our thoracic spine. So our T-spine here, a lot of times when we have that upper cross syndrome like this, we're not able to actually get into extension. Like this is it. We go from here to here. But we should actually be able to get into some extension in that T-spine. And we'll compensate by doing it in the low lumbar spine instead, right? So we're gonna use the foam roller to help us achieve that. Let me get a little closer here. So start about the mid back. Keep the hips fixed. Again, keep that cue, rib cage to pelvis. I like to put my elbows together, hands clasped, and I like to hold on to my head. So you can use a towel if you want to here. And all we're gonna do is try to extend the T-spine over the top. So you're gonna try to roll back without using your low back, okay? Extend over the top and then do a little crunch to come back up, okay? You can do a few of those reps at each vertebra, okay? So you're trying to get that extension over the top. Now this one will also feel really good. You might get some pops and cracks. That's fine. It doesn't matter so much. But really the focus here is to get that extension in your T-spine. Another one that works really well is it helps with extension and rotation. And this one is now active, okay? So you get back into all fours, quadruped position. I'll come a little bit closer to the camera. And then you're gonna take one hand and scratch that, or put it over the top, scratch your back or put it over the top of that T1 vertebra that you can feel that bump. Open up that elbow, and then we're gonna do some extensions here. Lift that elbow towards the corner of the ceiling. So this will feel really challenging at first. You're trying to rotate and extend that T-spine at the same time. Keeping your abs tight, hips are fixed. Okay, you can hold for a few seconds and then release. I would do like 5 to 10 of those and then switch. So this is activating that middle and lower trapezius to pull that scapula up and actually extend that T-spine a little more. So that's another great kind of activation and a stretch. You get some chest stretch there and lat stretch as you're doing that. Okay, shoulder combos. You can do this on the ball or on the floor. These are pretty classic NASM moves. I've actually done them since I was certified first a long time ago. So get into your position on the ball where it's just right underneath your chest, okay? Nice plank with your lower body. And then you're going to do, you can do Ys, right? Thumbs up, creating a Y here. You can do a T. Thumbs up is nice because it requires that external rotation of the shoulder. And then you can also do an A this way, squeezing back. And this is very similar to the floor prone cobra that is in the NASM text as well. So the goal here is to coach your client. A lot of times what they'll do is they'll be down over the ball like this and trying to lift from the shoulder. Okay, so coach them to engage the core, lift the shoulders up and back. This might be it, right? And squeeze their shoulder blades together as they come up into the Y, as they come up into the T, as they come up into the A. So we're really getting that mid back. Yeah, it can be a challenge. If they're slipping or something, you can put them down on their knees like this and do it this way too. It's a little bit less resistance, but the goal is the same, to activate the middle and lower trapezius and rhomboids. Okay, you can also do, oh, I didn't show you this one, the robot dance. Gets some external rotation too. So this one, the palms are facing back behind you, and then we are going to do a wide row basically, and then you can do some external rotation. If you really want the shoulders to burn, I also add the overhead press. But if you have someone who shrugs a lot, when they do any sort of pressing motions, I would eliminate that piece and just stay here, okay? That we're getting posterior deltoid and rotator cuff. All right, the last one I'll leave you with is the serve the platter here. I'm gonna do this one standing this time. So palms are going up, elbow glued to your side. We're going to do an external rotation at the shoulder. So we are activating our rotator cuff, and then we're gonna tuck our chin, right? Because what is it with upper cross syndrome? We typically have this hunch, but then also extension here. So we're gonna try to activate those muscles that will pull it back, the cervical flexors. So elbows pinned to your side, palms up, external rotation, just as far as you can go, okay? You should already feel this in the back of your shoulder. And now slide your chin back, okay? So here, and tuck your chin back. Hold for a count of 10. And then you can release. So the key here is making sure that we're not tucking this way. We're sliding our chin back, like it's keeping it level with the ground, but just sliding it back on a track.